Your Excellencies, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure, my privilege to welcome us to yet another in the series, the Nigeria History Series. Today is a fairly peculiar day. It's a day that many of us are suffering from visitations of an unkind kind. Let me begin by making apologies. The COVID-19 virus is clearly on a rampage, and I wonder how we're going to get our country to wake up to this reality, because there are still so many doubters, and yet all around us, some of our best are succumbing to it. Just before we went on, we got communication from Professor Itayo, one of our guests this session, who has been previously in this series with us twice. He was so broken because yesterday, he's in Atlanta, yesterday he lost two of his very close friends here at home to COVID-19. I too lost one of my own best friends yesterday. In fact, at this time, 2 weeks ago, I was with him, and his hometown was honoring him, big chieftaincy title and all of that. But yesterday afternoon, Professor Ibrahim succumbed to the COVID-19 virus attack, and so have several others. This is really clearly a pandemic and is racing through the land. So in many ways, it both will have its effect on our conversation that is at one time sobering, but in another way, appropriate, because it helps us centralize these issues. We live in perilous times, and only those who are prepared can go through this and come out with only minimal damage. One or two of our panelists are also in awkward situations relating to this. Some will join us. Former Health Minister, Professor Onyebuchi Chukwu, is at some events and joining us in a few minutes. I don't know if he has joined already. As I've mentioned, Professor Itayo, former Health Minister, also is unable to join because he's broken very much with the loss of two friends overnight. We have with us another Health Minister, Prince Julius Adelusi-Adeluyi, who also is chair of the Academy of Pharmacy. So it's a particular value that he has joined us today. We have several of our other panelists who are on. The DG of NAFDAC, Professor Mojisola, has also joined us. And we have some others. We have Mrs. Clare has also joined us. Now, the way that I had hoped that we can proceed today is to begin by asking that all of our panelists give us a 3-minute reflection, on what they think is the key challenge of the health sector in Nigeria, how they think collaboration between the stakeholders can proceed so that we come to an outcome that will help the manufacture, control, and distribution of drugs in our country, because this is so important. We are talking about this pandemic to which we are losing some of our finest. I can tell you that last week there was hardly a day that I didn't lose somebody I knew well. Hardly a day. One person that I knew well. And we see India saying that they will not export vaccines that they manufacture until they have taken care of their own people adequately. Even though there are efforts to bring some more global justice into the distribution of vaccines, but it tells us how critical it is that we build capacity to be able to manufacture, research to start with, manufacture and distribute drugs in Nigeria. We began last week by speaking to some of the ways that we could do that. We talked about a biotechnology pharmacy park, if you will. But closely related to all of these kinds of initiatives is how enterprise organizes itself, piggybacks on basic science. So the whole business of STEM education is so important. How are we developing the teaching of science and technology, engineering, mathematics? How are we introducing design and tech, even at primary level, coming up? And how are we encouraging the university system to be able to create science parks, biotech parks, to support the business of developing pharmaceuticals? And how are we controlling their distribution so that people get efficacious interventions when they get sick? As we said in the beginning of this series, we have taken as peg the Great Escape, the work of the Princeton University economist Angus Deaton, who essentially pegs human progress, economic prosperity on healthcare, education. In the subtitle of that wonderful book, The Great Escape, it's Health, Wealth, and the Origins of Inequality. How do we bridge the Gini index in our country, the internal inequalities? How do we bridge the inequality between us and other economies in the world, first Western industrialized economies, now Asian economies? If we could just begin our conversation today by getting from each of our panelists a 3-minute précis on the kinds of things they identify as the critical challenge and what we may need to do to work together in spite of what can be institutional rivalries and all of those kinds of things that tend to get in the way of our getting things done. What are those critical things that they think we must do? And then we'll get into the depths of this conversation. I would like to welcome particularly and ask him to go first, Prince Julius Adelusi-Adeluyi. It's a great pleasure to have you, and kindly lead us in this conversation.
Thank you, Pat.
As I said, we will take each panelist, one after the other, on these 3 minutes. One critical point. What's the problem? What can we do to solve the problem?
Yeah.
I think that you need to mute yourself. Part of the effect of being in the Caribbean, as it seems you are.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
No. Yes.
Yes, we can.
Please unmute.
Yes,
You can hear
I
you.
have unmuted.
But I'm not hearing you.
We can hear you.
Hello?
We can hear you, sir.
But can Pat hear me now? Hello?
Okay, can you say something again? I'm sorry that that I was not hearing you, but some were hearing you.
Good, can you hear me now, Pat?
Please unmute yourself.
That has been effectively done.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I've always heard you.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, no, that was me ahead.
Hello? Hello?
Okay. What, can we bring that equipment from which you can hear him here?
Maybe you should start with
Okay, now I hear you. Now I hear you. Sorry. I hear you clearly now. Welcome.
Thank you, Pat. And I hope the others are also hearing me. I'd like to congratulate you, Pat, for continuing doggedly to see what you can do to make Nigeria a better space for all of us. May you be beneficially blessed. I also would like to appreciate all those who are panelists here. You can see Clare very clearly, and I can see Mojisola, NAFDAC, and I hope Chukwu is here already, Onyebuchi. I'd like to welcome all of you and all those others who are on the discussion wall. To go straight to the point, Nigeria is not short of ideas and persons of quality when it comes to addressing our present challenges. And I like the way Pat has put it, what's that one thing within 3 minutes that we can hint upon that needs to be done. I would say more than one, but I'll be quite watchful of the time. I believe that Nigeria has one of the best rules, regulations, ideas in writing, how the health sector can be better. But Nigeria has scored very poorly in the area of implementation. So the first thing to address is how can we make a reality of these beautiful ideas, proposals, and recommendations that we have made in the past, dating all the way to 1960, when the first government had very beautiful ideas about how to make health available to all, affordable to all. But some of the things they said in 1961 and several years later are still on the shelves gathering dust. And some of the things they said that long ago, if quoted today, are still very relevant. So it's not the shortage of ideas, but the strategy to change the narrative and to make sure that all our ideas can be implemented with the fullness of time. That's why very many people are frustrated to continue with discussions and seminars and so on. We're very good at those. But if they are just left to gather dust, that's not good enough. But really going forward, what next I think we should do as an interest group is to realize that Nigeria is in the throes of many difficulties. And if we in this sector want to make progress, that progress can be made only by us. That progress can be made only by our own efforts. And I think the various areas that are important are data gathering. We need exactitude in the data, in the demographics of the stakeholders in this particular sector of government's economics. We need also to realize that we cannot do it alone. Having a silo approach does not help. It has not helped in 60 years. It won't help if we continue. So we need to network and have partnerships with all those other stakeholders that are either directly or tangentially connected with our plans for development. Thirdly, we need a renewed knowledge-driven approach to addressing some of these problems. Beginning, for example, with the universities. All these old-fashioned ways of addressing already known subjects are not necessarily fit for purpose now. We should review the curriculum. We should review the subject areas in such a way that we have graduates that are fit for purpose, that will be confident in innovation. I believe that if we address the issue of knowledge, we'll be going places. I wouldn't go to detail because of your 3-minute time. I also believe now that partnerships can be very important. Partnerships, not only with people in the health field, but also people who are involved, like engineers and so on. Finally, on this 3-minute trip, I like to say that pharmacy, the health field, the health sector, is challenged from lack of clout. Therefore, we need to be able to network. We do our homework, we network for the net worth of this sector. Politicians take all the decisions almost completely ignorant about what our needs are. Why don't we have people in the political heights? Why don't we have people who are ministers, who will understand our language to be able to address issues of doctors, issues of pharmacists, issues in the health sector? I'll stop there.
Getting us started, I mean, you have raised some very critical points that we will come back to during the course of the conversation. I particularly want to get to the issue of the narrative that speaks to implementation as a problem, and we can take it going from there because it's a very critical part of this conversation. I'd like next to ask Professor Mojisola, who was with us at the last conversation, in which a number of interesting ideas seem to crystallize. I would like for her to give us a sense today of one critical problem that she thinks must be tackled, and one critical idea about how these partnerships that have been spoken about can be built. You know, part of the trouble in the sector I gleaned from the conversation the last time is that we have a zero-sum mindset in the sector where various actors kind of assume that their winning means that others have to lose. And so one cohort, sees its problems in a particular tunnel, as it were, and the other sees it in a different tunnel, so that we end up playing lose, win, and end up lose. How can we create a win-win approach where partnerships for all the stakeholders come to play in a way that delivers the advance of the common good of all and makes all the players winners? Professor Adeyeye.
Thank you very much, Professor Otome. Thank you, other panelists, for this important discussion. I hope everybody can hear me. Can everybody hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Prince Adeluyi mentioned what I was going to say. One of the things that I was going to say, which is implementation. I was at a meeting about a year plus ago, and an African told us that Nigeria is good in making policies, but he mentioned an African country where he came from, and that it is his country that knows how to do implementation. I felt ashamed, but I also felt that this person was saying the truth. And I will start with love of country. The moment we start loving Nigeria more than ourselves, we will have turned the corner. The moment we start loving Nigeria more than ourselves, the issues at stake we'll be able to face, no matter how difficult or how challenging it is. And I will start from the regulatory perspective. NAFDAC is in charge of food, drugs, and other regulated products. You cannot be greater than the framework of any agency. No CEO or DG or minister can be greater than the framework of any institution. If the framework is weak, whoever is heading it is just fooling himself or herself. And coming from my own experience for the last 3 years, I met a framework that was weak. Therefore, the pharmaceutical industry became weak because you cannot regulate people when your own internal capacity is weak. That is what NAFDAC has been doing for the last 3 years. And I've met a lot of resistance. Why? Because we don't love our country. If we love our country, even if we don't understand what somebody else is doing positively, we say, okay, let's see what the outcome is going to be. So love of country, number one. Resisting changes because of endemic corruption is another problem. We cannot be greater than ourselves. Once we love our country, corruption will start decreasing. But if we don't love our country, we will just be playing hokey pokey. In terms of, we've just heard of many friends dying because of COVID. We used to manufacture vaccine before. What happened? Because we prefer to have 10 houses, marry 10 wives, marry whatever, at the detriment of our country. The world is laughing at us. And we are dancing as a madman in the market. We've got to love our country. If we love our country, we will know how to head our agencies. If we love our country, we will respect our students in the university. We will not turn them to angry mob who has lost 1 year of education. The Bible says, do not exasperate your children. We have exasperated our children. And what do you think we're going to get? Wild wind, of course. If we love our country, stealing money from the government will not be the first thing we want to do if we occupy a position. That I'm not going to spend too much time, but if we don't love our country, all the things we are saying here is nonsense. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Adeyeye.
I think that your passion is very self-evident, and we need to draw on that kind of passion to make progress. But Professor Onyebuchi Chukwu, who is with us in his previous participation in this, had talked about a lot of the studies that were on ground, the work that was done in his time, the work that was done before his time, and all of that. Now, Prince Adelusi-Adeluyi had talked about implementation. He too served in that role quite a while back, and he thought the ideas, a lot of them were in place. What, in your opinion, and let me, as a management scientist myself, let me give you my perspective on this whole business of implementation. I typically argue that to talk about good policy and bad implementation is, pardon my English, a bit of an oxymoron. Because a good policy thinks about the problems of implementation and therefore designs around those problems so that the outcome will be fit for purpose. But there seems to be a Nigerian way of writing nice things down, and then somehow the things that are written don't get implemented, and then we blame implementation. How can we change this around? How can we get all the stakeholders to own the success so that everybody profits from how these ideas then get implemented so that they are owners? They are not, that thing, my favor those people, but they were against us. How do we go in this win-win direction? Now we're all losers. We got lose-lose. All of us are losing friends. I spoke to you 2 days ago about my friend, what can be done in Abuja to help him. But yesterday we had lost him. His son jumped on a plane in the US carrying BPAP machines, medicines, everything. By the time he landed in Abuja yesterday, his father had died. What's your thinking?
That for me?
Yeah, Professor Onyebuchi, yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Tommy, and thank you for this series which you've sustained thus far. Thank you for inviting me. And I also want to pay my homage to one of my most illustrious predecessors in office.
Are we having a break?
We lost
okay, can you unmute again? Oh, network, okay. Maybe you can put on video.
Prince, and I'm happy you continue to go for your life.
You can go ahead, but if your network is challenged, you can put up the video and we'll just take the voice.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes,
Is
yes.
it better now?
Yes.
Yes, it's better.
Okay, so I have to remove my video. Pardon me for that. And now
No trouble.
I just think, I just think the problem is so far we've not had a consistent national leadership that understands why you have government. The job of the government actually is not to preach. The government can preach, but their job is not to preach. We have the clergy, we have pastors, reverends, and imams to do the preaching. The job of government, why do we need government? Is for law and order. 2 words, law. Law means prescribing what ought to be done. If we are all thinking alike, there will be no need for law. But it is the duty of government to promulgate law, to legislate. So law. Then the other word is order. There's no way you can have that if you can't implement your laws, if you cannot enforce your laws. So law enforcement is part of the job of government. We can even see part of the weakness we have in the present pandemic. The weakness in control and managing this particular pandemic is that the government continues to preach. Their job is not to preach. Leave that to the pastors and imams and the media to do the preaching for you. Your job is to enforce whatever policies, law, we're not enforcing. That is just the problem. Wherever your office is, your job is to enforce. And it's in the course of you enforce and begin to spot out the loopholes on those legislation by either repealing entirely and reenacting, or by amending, from to put in the proper people that need to be. It can only happen by half times. It's not there because our system of electing leaders has so many deficiencies, given our socio-economic developmental level. So that is the problem. But what can we do at smaller levels where we have professionals, for instance? At the lower levels where we have professionals, if the professional thinks that they have the capacity and the ability to perform, it is their job to begin to enforce. It is their job to enforce. Everything starts with leadership at every level, whether it be the family, be it in your small unit, be it in your small department, be it in your parastatal, be it in the ministry. Wherever you find yourself as the leader, the job starts with being able to enforce whatever extant policies, extant regulations, extant rules, extant laws, whatever you find that you can work with, and then begin to see what gaps you have and how you can improve on it. That's just my take on that question. There's no other thing for us to do. So can government stop preaching? Leave preaching to those whose job is exclusively to preach. If you have done enough ordering. If you've done enough enforcement, then find time to preach. You can add on to it. So that's the point I want to make, Professor Tommy.
Get a perspective from the, if you will, private sector, stroke civil society that engage on a daily basis with how these things are not working. And I'll turn now to Clare or Mashe. Clare has approached these challenges as a professional in the industry, as someone engaged with kind of civil society part of the industry. And we still have these challenges. We want to get to solving problems. The fundamental reasons for entrepreneurship is problem solving. how can we get away from the kind of situation we have found ourselves in today, that we're not manufacturing drugs really in Nigeria, and when there is a supply chain crisis like COVID pandemic brought, our manufacturing sector is shut down, literally, because as DG NAFDAC said the last time, most things come in from outside of the country and just water gets added. How can we turn things around thinking win-win for everybody, the manufacturers, the regulators, the ordinary person who deserves and desires affordable and available, access to healthcare?
Thank you, Professor Tommy, and thank you for my senior colleagues who have spoken before me. I specifically want to recognize the DG of NAFDAC with her very passionate, will I say, plea to every Nigerian to think made in Nigeria and think about good policies and think about the best interest of those of us in healthcare. Nigeria is a fast-growing economy. We are faced with lots of challenges. Policies are abounding, but at the end of the day, we have ineffective and inefficient drug supply. And as we can see with COVID-19, supplies of pharmaceuticals and commodities are extremely important to be able to get access to healthcare. But when we have a drug distribution system that is chaotic, that is porous, that is dependent on importation, it makes the regulator very frustrated, very hard to regulate, and therefore it becomes almost impossible to administrate properly to be able to give us the kind of access to good quality medicines that we need. And therefore, to my mind, from where we sat, I served as the president of the Healthcare Federation of Nigeria. Presently, I'm the president of the West African Healthcare Federation. This is something that's a big challenge across West Africa, not just Nigeria. And there are many reasons. The importation is a big one, Prof. We need to get drug security as a country, where at least most of the major pharmaceuticals that we require are made in country. We need policies that are Nigerian for Nigeria, where government, when they're going to buy pharmaceuticals, gives the pharmaceutical industry some kind of preference over importation. We have to have incentives, a bouquet of incentives, physical and non-physical incentives that will promote investment in our country, that will not just be promoted by government, that will work and we will buy for Nigeria. Now, to be able to do this, one of the big issues is the fact that we do think in silos, and it starts on both sides, both on the public and the private sector. The private sector works in a lacuna. The public sector doesn't recognize the role of the private sector until there's issues, then they come to the private sector for money. So I think the big thing we really need is to have structured dialogue, regular dialogue, where we're all at the table. We don't want policies passed down to the private sector. We want to be at the table while it's being done. You sometimes hear me say that if you are not at the table when policies are being done, then you're on the menu. And this has been the challenge. So we don't have a lack of policies as a country. What we do is policies that were done and handed down that are not mutually rewarding and are not in the best interest always of the Nigerian citizen. I think we need to have patient-centric policies. And you do seem to have a lot of vested interest on parties. And I don't think that those vested interest groups should be what we should take. All policies should be to the best interest of Nigerians. We need to have structured dialogue, open dialogue with the public sector, that is policymakers, regulators, with industry leaders, where we can exchange knowledge, where we can deliberate on core issues, where we can look at the things that are the bedrock of the pharmaceutical industry, and more importantly, the bigger health industry, where we share learnings, where we leverage on innovation, where we take on new opportunities like leveraging on technology, and that we throw away all this old stuff and look about out-of-box thinking. How do we solve problems together, having an open voice? So to my mind, Prof, it is that strategic partnership between the public and private sector through structured dialogue. That way we'll be able to increase investments. We will have one common direction, which is access to quality medicines, access to healthcare for all Nigerians, that we can reduce out-of-pocket expenditure because we know that we must have insurance. There are certain policies that are not necessarily pharmaceutical policies, but that are holistic policies that the ministers of health that we've had on this call have done. We need to stop thinking in silos as pharmacists and think of ourselves as integral, important members of the healthcare team, and that we also need enabling in policy outside pharmacy to be able to make it work. And one would be access to, to my mind, mandatory healthcare insurance, so that the 70 to 90% dependency on out-of-pocket payments that are impoverishing Nigerians can really stop. There's a lot of issues we have. We've gone from out-of-pocket to now to catastrophic out-of-pocket. We have this vicious cycle that we need to turn into a virtuous cycle, but we need enabling policies with all of us at the table, speaking with one voice for the patient, and that is giving us access to quality healthcare. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so very much, Claire. I think that this is a very, very critical lead-in to part of an idea that I think can be helpful here. As you will remember, Claire, I introduced an initiative in 1998 at the Lagos Business School. It became the iconic Lagos Business School breakfast briefing session. Now, the concept was very simple. Let's get people together in a very refined way to look at the problems of Nigerian economy in general, that particular program. One of the things that was important for setting that program up was these are very important people whose time means a lot. So we determined that this program would be a breakfast. It would run from 8:30 to 9:30. We would get somebody who can study the economy and what is evolving in the economy to make a 10-minute presentation about the developments in the economy from last month to this month. We'll get an expert in some particular problem issue to make a no more than 15-minute presentation on that particular issue. And then we'll get a quick dialogue. And then at precisely 9:30, and I chaired that process, or I moderated that process for 10 years. In fact, one of my favorite references was an American ambassador who arrived and ran into me somewhere. And when I was introduced as Patutomi, he said, "Oh, you are Patutomi." My predecessor had a going away note that you host a breakfast meeting at the Lagos Business School, which is the only event in Nigeria that starts on time and ends on time, and that you must not miss attending it. Now, this model of this breakfast series, I have recommended to another sector of the economy that needs to constantly dialogue. I mean, how, in my opinion, wonderful it would be if all the critical CEOs, pharmaceutical industry CEOs, the DG NAFDAC, the Registrar of the Pharmaceutical Representation Council, about the stakeholders, 1 hour at breakfast every month, some expert, 10-minute presentation on these particular problems, and everybody dialogues. Oh, this is a policy idea we're thinking of in NAFDAC. This is a problem, and everybody makes their input. And this leads to a wholesome, holistic policy frame that everybody can feel ownership of, and therefore increase confidence for investments to take place. Is this a kind of bad idea? I would like to invite the Registrar of the Council, who's represented today by pharmacist Ibrahim, Babashehu, Ahmed. If Pharmacist Ahmed can join us, what do you think of an idea like this to bring all the stakeholders together once a month, quick, short, sharp conversations about problem policies, what should be done, what can facilitate our being able to achieve the matter of drug security that Clare referred to, for example, because this is an existential issue for Nigeria. And how can we get business to clearly show what may not be understood by the academic, the regulator, and all of that, and everybody can, from sharing knowledge, work out something that is win-win, and therefore ultimately it's easier to get effectiveness in implementation because everybody owns it and everybody knows the direction they're traveling in. Pharmacist Ahmed. You. Please unmute yourself. Here.
Hello, sir.
Hello, yes. Now we can hear you.
Good afternoon, sir. I said, not knowing that I will be called to make some comments on this, I'd actually earlier on put up two comments on the chat room. And they are directly related to this issue. And what are they? My recommendation is that each time we are setting up or setting out to do any policy, it is very critical that we do stakeholders mapping to know who and who among the various stakeholders within the pharmaceutical landscape or whichever sphere of life or aspect of the economy that is going to be impacted by the policy, to do appropriate mapping, then do appropriate stakeholders engagement through advocacy and sensitization, leading to development of the policy. And I think when we have that, and then at the end, we also have, after the development, a framework for monitoring and evaluation. I want to believe that that is one single way that we are going to achieve we are going to overcome the challenges associated with the issue of policy implementations. And I want to give one simple example. Although we may not have achieved it, but I think if we look back, for the first time ever, to the best of my knowledge, and as a regulator, the only time we have ever had people in the open drug market talking face to face with regulators as to the closure of the open drug market and the implementation of the National Drug Distribution Guideline, which was launched by Professor Onyebuchi Chukwu when he was Minister of Health. There was no other time that we have ever achieved that other than now, although we have delays in achieving it. But why we also have buy-in from stakeholders and less resistance from them, despite the delay, is because there was effective mapping of stakeholders, there was effective stakeholders engagement, and that achieved a lot of buy-in. I just based on that today we can say confidently that though the process of implementation is slow, it's not completely abandoned. So I want to align again, as I have earlier posted, that we need to do proper stakeholders mapping, proper stakeholders engagement through advocacy, sensitization, and like Clare said, having everyone on the table at the point of the development. And I think including the fact that even the monitoring and evaluation framework should be open to the stakeholders. I think with that, we are going to move away from what the challenges we have now. But I also want to add, there are times we have also faced some challenges as regulators, and that is the challenges associated with litigations, where you even have stakeholders who have understanding, but because of mischief, wants to take the advantage of the fact that they can go to court to stop you from doing what you are doing. But many a times, once the right thing is done from the beginning, I can assure you that even litigations can easily be overcome. We were able to obtain over 43 court cases between December 2017 and December 2019, not because of anything, but because we did all that we were supposed to do at the point of starting the process. Thank you very much.
Very much indeed. I think this is such an important thing about the engagement with all the stakeholders. I think that part of the challenge is understanding power. Because many times, regulatory failure, in my view, in Nigeria, comes from a perspective of power without understanding enough some of the nuances that need to be communicated, which can make things, more acceptable and bring people together. Even when the regulator means very, very well, it might just turn out that they have not paid attention to something. I think in one of the series, I referred to a case study that I wrote many years ago, that one of the most admired ministers of health, Professor Olikoye Ransom Kuti. However, in not consulting the so-called essential drugs list, turned out to result in the deindustrialization of the pharmaceutical sector in Nigeria. And it could have happened better if there was engagement and conversation rather than a few well-meaning people gathering together and making a decision for the industry that turned out to miss some vital things in the process. Now, having said this, and having thrown out this proposal for the industry to consider as a way of functioning, a simple thing, like a breakfast every meeting, rotate the sponsorship, every company is responsible for next week's breakfast, next month's breakfast, won't cost them much, and all the CEOs, a few experts, economists, academic researchers in pharmacy, in the basic science, and just quick, short, and conversation, and the regulators share what's on their mind as a problem, and people say this is how we think can be solved, and together everybody more or less has a sense, even if they are not completely sold on something, at least they know what they're thinking and all of that, and the conversation can continue. I would like the industry to give thought to that model, to use it to go forward. But having said that, as we come back around, and I'd like to return to Prince Juli Adelusi-Adeluyi in reflecting on an issue that is often said is Nigerian. And I don't know that Nigerians are designed peculiarly relative to any other people. Last meeting, Dr. Emafo raised that point very strongly. This meeting, Professor Adeyeye has spoken to it again. And this is the problem of corruption and how it kind of sullies and mockies things. But we know that in some countries like Hong Kong, even Singapore, corruption was much worse than it is in Nigeria today. But they managed to get rid of all of that. Beyond, challenging people's patriotism, what could we be doing to rid the health sector of the corruption that has become an impediment to effectiveness?
Right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Thank you again for inviting me. And I must really apologize for not coming to earlier meetings, but that's what Nigeria offers you. I think that this discussion is going in the right direction, but I know that we cannot finish with the issue of implementation just within a 1 hour discussion. We're just touching on it. But if we as a sector have it in mind, there are very many ways in which we as a sector can get around it. And discussions are on that, I can assure you. But now you're talking about corruption. I believe that we don't want to go into that detail. Corruption used to be something that was timidly followed. If you look at the early 60s part, if somebody took 2%, he was too shy to confess it. And most of the projects in the plan worked more or less 80%. The budget was so fulfilled. Then came the 70s and corruption really blossomed. Today, corruption is a profession. It is perhaps the leading profession. And you know that when you want to fight a profession, the profession would fight back. Corruption has become like the COVID. If you take it out in one particular section, it has a way of traveling to another section and then migrating back to you. However, Nigeria is not such a bad place. Somebody mentioned leadership. Now, and you and I part have agonized on this leadership problem, and we have said to ourselves, we should not give up. Either a million people that are very bad, corrupt, and so on, and only a band of 10, like Patito's gang, that is now 20 years old, will be the ones that say they are honest and so on. Let them not give up. But there are too many people giving up. Our value systems are going down. Even those who are straight and proper gets frustrated and cast down. And we have too many cases that really encourages corruption. I would say that what you need to do is to build on your idea now. You remember in 1999, you published a book, and the book was entitled To Serve is to Live. Perhaps that, by the way, is one of your best books, despite the fact that you've written very many esoteric ones. Now, that was more or less like a biography. And several things you said there are still leading you on to make a contribution. Now, we must regenerate more patutomies. And you know how difficult that is. You ran for governor, and you know how corruption made it impossible for you, whatever your value, to become even the primary person. You also know that you ran for presidency. So many people in that area get frustrated. And I say to you, do not be frustrated. Many people are frustrated about Nigeria, but Nigeria is really not as bad as we tend to picture it, if only we have good leadership. As we speak, Nigeria is still the 31st biggest economy in the world. Nigeria has Lagos as its commercial capital. Lagos is about the 17th biggest city in the world. And you find that with all these problems we're talking about, of the 16 fastest growing cities in the world, 4 are from Nigeria. The fastest growing city in Nigeria now is Nnewi. It's doing so at 29.6, followed by Abuja, 28.4, Uyo, 28.3, and Port Harcourt, 25.6. Now, we are still growing. We are getting strong. What is giving us bad optics is the fact that leadership is not expressing itself, is not exerting itself positively, and frustration tends to be the upper crust that is visible all over the world. But the real material of Nigeria, I can tell you, is strong. That's why I'm telling you apart. Do not give up. And those of us who are listening should also not give up. For example, there's Professor here, my young sister, Mojisola. Mojisola came into NAFDAC with all the hopes in the world, with all the ideas of conquering. And you find that you have been distracted majorly by things you did not even consider would be on the table. It's corruption. Corruption not just material, but even of ideas. And so many rogue ideas, fake situations. And that takes more than a necessary part of your time. Now, Professor Chukwu, who is here, was Minister of Health. Professor, you'll recall that a few years ago, we were both at the University College Hospital, where there was a congregation of hundreds of graduating medical students, pharmacists, resident doctors, professors, and so on. And you were the guest speaker, and I was the chairman. Now, think back, Professor, of those wonderful ideas you espoused at that time. Think back of the ovation you had at that time. Has the needle moved 1 inch? No way. It is because of corruption in every part. That's why I'm saying that we should not let a crisis waste. This crisis has worked in such a way that government has been forced to pay attention to the health sector as a matter of priority. Let not this crisis waste. But government is not going to go further. It's only those who are stakeholders that should get together and find a way forward. That's the only thing that can reward somebody like Pat Utomi. And that's why I was saying to him that the Academy of Pharmacy is addressing various pharmaceutical aspects. For example, education. I think it was Clare that used to talk about a disruptive approach. Now, a disruptive approach is fantastic. It's modern, but it can only be done if it is rehearsed, if it is strategized, and if it is positive. Now, and I think the only way in which that can be done is part to be futuristic, to go to generation next, the younger generation. The most frustrated people in this country now are the younger generation. The end SARS indicates that kind of thing. But let us look at it on this sector. Many young pharmacists are frustrated because they have been trained in the old mold. Right now is the time for those of us who are stakeholders to plant pharmaceutical trees that will provide a shade, not for us, but for them when it's their time to perform. And I think this is what we should be focusing on after this discussion with you, Pat. You have challenged us. And I want to say, as the president of the Academy of Pharmacy, that you will hear from us. This idea about having people seated at breakfast, it has been practiced by the Nigerian Association of Industrial Pharmacists, who have brought together CEOs. But your idea is useful, it will be revived. Now, corruption, finally, if I may just say something, can only change if this band that I call the Pareto band kind of people would build their ideas as cleverly as they can, put it in writing, and try to follow it up. What do I mean? When you look at history, very few people have changed a situation just by complaining and complaining. It has been done mostly by building a new model that makes the existing model unattractive and obsolete. That's what we should be doing now. We're not happy with what is going on. Let us use ourselves and the children, well, not children, young people, to follow us and make sure that we can build a new model. That's what Facebook did. That's what people in the communication industries did. Nobody needs to tell us to migrate from the old to the new. We can achieve this. I believe that one or two comments I want to make, but I don't want to dominate this beautiful discussion.
Well, thank you so very much. We will come back to you before we are out. I'm going to be turning next to Professor Onyebuchi Chukwu in going back to some of the ideas that are on table, but focusing principally on partnerships and how we build these partnerships that can make us make progress. But just before we do that, I think it's appropriate for us to take a message from in looking at partnerships.
There's something every mother has. It's something like a sixth sense, like knowing exactly when her baby's in danger. It doesn't matter where she is or what she's doing. She carries her family in her heart always and knows when all is not well, even when it appears like she might be wrong. A mother's instincts are hardly ever wrong. And she trusts M&B paracetamol, the red one, to save the day. With fast-acting and effective M&B paracetamol tablet, the red one, and its pleasant-tasting pineapple flavor syrup, she sends aches and pains far away from her family. Because mothers who know trust May and Baker for its over 70 years of quality experience. If symptoms persist after 2 days, consult your doctor. M&B paracetamol. Pain can't stop you.
This election go hard them. No, we lost our. Now you be this.
Yeah.
Every time before we dey see you dey waka like who know well. Now just you don't dey campaign.
Before, malaria dey knock me gbasgbos. And then one day I go pharmacy. I don't try 3 different malaria medicine. None work for me.
Have you tried Malact? Malact is the effective malaria medicine from May and Baker, makers of quality medicines for over 75 years. Malact contains a combination active drug called dihydroartemisinin piperacin, which keeps working in your body for up to 6 weeks, stopping the malaria parasite from knocking you down. This is why Malact is your control button against malaria.
Now 3 tablets I take every day for 3 days.
Now so Malact give malaria boy one time. Now my head be malaria. I go punch my own back.
Malact, your control button against malaria. Available in pharmacies near you.
Thank you very much. Welcome back. I was addressing the subject of partnerships when we took that break. We've got a situation where there are good ideas all around the industry. People who are distributing complain about not getting access to an appropriate place to build a distribution center, for example. And so the role of, say, government is critical in making sure that there's ease of access to land to build such a facility of critical importance, even if it means evoking the law of eminent domain, because that is a very critical subject matter for society, almost existential in its very nature. We have the idea of parks, that you could provide every facility, given what it takes to manufacture effectively in the pharmaceutical area. If every one person has a factory in Sokoto, one in Ilorin, another one in Yenagoa, you may all be struggling to provide that same quality thing. But if there are 2 or 3, if you will, concentrations where in Samu Huabunga was talking about work on such in Ebonyi or so, you have a cluster where everything, power is 24/7 without fail. You have water at the best quality treated, and this and that and that. And entrepreneurs of such parks are working with players. Obviously, there'll be a lot more progress made. Clusters all around the world have done a lot more by building the strength of those competitive partners. Finance is a critical part of that too. How do you have these meetings every month, for example, and not bring in private equity firms, bankers, to understand the issues in the industry so that the appropriate financing. We talked about central bank making some money available, but it's peanuts compared to the real needs of the industry. But if we had such clustering on the one hand, weekly, monthly meetings on the other hand, where people are exchanging views about the ideas of what's moving things forward, private equity from outside of the country that sees the potential that Prince Adelusi-Adeluyi outlined in the growth of the country, the size of the people, and all of that. These private capital can flow in and enable these things be achieved. What partnerships do we need to build, and how should we be building them for effectiveness? From your experience, Professor Chukwu.
Thank you, Professor Tommy. You talked about partnership. So partnership is about synergy. It's all about synergy. And synergy is about the recognition that each one of you has where you have your strengths in the partnership and your weaknesses, and the mutual respect for each other's or one another's strengths. It is about cooperation. It is about symbiosis. It's win-win. That's why it's a symbiosis. There's no parasitic relationship in a true partnership. So how do we get about it? I think it was Ibrahim Ahmed who reminded us that yes, these things are possible. Some time ago, we were able to kick off the national drug distribution policy. People thought it was impossible. I wasn't the minister that started talking about it, and I know I will never be the last. But my attitude was, because I hated the word chaotic drug distribution. Please, my school colleagues, I hated that even till now. When I had Clare mentioning it, I said, oh dear, there's nothing chaotic about the drug distribution, but there's everything wrong about the drug distribution. We know the drug distribution in Nigeria, we know it, but it's totally in the wrong hands. It is wrongly done, and it's totally unethical. NAFDAC will even educate us much better. There's nothing chaotic. When we keep saying chaotic, we don't want to tackle the problem. So I refuse to say it was chaotic. I said, look, we all know where the problem is. Let's begin to tackle it. And that's why we made so little progress, and I hope we are still doing more on that. So, Professor Tommy, you are right. And just like Professor Prince Adelusi-Adeluyi has already asked you to fire on, go ahead with your breakfast meeting. The only thing I want to add, let it not just be a talk shop. At the end of each breakfast, let people not just eat your food and go away. At the end of each breakfast, have actionable points. Assign people, not make it for everybody, just assign people for each role. And at the next breakfast, even if it's just one step they've made, it doesn't matter. Every long journey starts with a single step. Let that person who had that responsibility just tell you what the step have been taken so far. We'll make progress, I tell you. So who are those to be in the partnership? Obviously, everybody, all the stakeholders. And in the case of the drug business, you've mentioned the regulators. You've mentioned the manufacturing companies, the pharmaceutical companies. You've mentioned the practicing pharmacists, community pharmacists. You should also remember there are people who must prescribe those medications. Remember that there are also people who consume those medications, the patients themselves. They must be part of it. We learn a lot from them. I also was a minister under whom we launched the National Pharmacovigilance Policy, because I believe all those people consuming must also show they have a responsibility to tell the rest of us how these drugs are performing. Whether they are subjective or not wasn't the issue, but let's begin to harness and collect this data so we can improve on our performance. So everyone is important. The finance people, dear, Clare will remember that when we started the one for clinics and hospitals, many of the top investors, top financial experts from around the world, Nigerians, all of them, we are part of that committee. We must recognize, even the leadership was not by a health professional. It didn't matter. I wanted someone who could drive the process, who had the experience, who had the confidence, who had the respect and the reach to be in the driver's seat for that project. So we can, everybody, government will continue to be a major stakeholder in everything, because that is why we're a country, we need government. Government job, always, we must remember that government strength is in policy formulation, policy analysis, policy retweaking, and in actually being the leader in gathering all these partners together. That is the job of government. Beyond that, government should then encourage those who are in the field. The PCM, for instance, has a regulatory function. NAFDAC has a regulatory function. And they should not in any way ever be micromanaged. Part of the problem too is that sometimes those who are in the ministry want to micromanage some of these parastatals. It's terrible. I never do that kind of thing. Your job is supervisory, not micromanaging. Leave them to manage it. They are better positioned to do the right things without every now and then looking behind them whether you are nodding or not nodding. So I think you are right, but let's get cracking. My problem is always, let's do it. Let's do it. Yes, Prince Adelusi-Adeluyi reminded me of our meeting in Ibadan. Well, Prof, sir, you've said that we should continue to talk about it. We should never give up. So I'll not give up like you. I'll not. And if you, who have been in this business much longer than me, has not given up today, I will not give up. So we're going to work with Professor Patutomi and every stakeholder, those who are here today and those who are outside. We can do it. Let's continue talking. Things keep getting better, though not as fast as all of us were we, but things are definitely getting better in some ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I think that this is a good point to bring back in the DG of NAFDAC to reflect on this partnership. How to be able to journey with the industry without the traditional perception that the regulator is a bully. You know, in Nigeria, typically, people who have power do not seem to think that their power is valued until they bully. Anybody who wears a uniform in Nigeria is a bully almost. A policeman, you want people to fear you. How does the regulator manage to be close enough to the industry as a partner and yet have enough distance to do that which is right? Because it is this distance business, I think, sometimes that leads to the bully orientation. So just broadly, speak to the regulator as partner.
Thank you, Professor Utomi. I would like to commend Professor Chukwu for mentioning the fact that the ministry is not supposed to micromanage the parastatals. That is heartwarming for me in particular. But in terms of regulator and the partnership with the stakeholders, I want to just quickly reflect about 20 years ago, 24 years ago, actually. I was in the US and I started a seminar series, Pharmaceutical Unit Operations, Regulatory Perspectives. I brought, as a professor, I brought the FDA together with the pharmaceutical industry. And that was the first time that there would be FDA industry people in the same room. And because the FDA was feared up to 1986, sorry, it was feared by the industry. So when we now start talking over lunch, during breakout sessions, we started removing the barriers. And that is the approach that I've taken in NAFDAC. We started our own quality management system where you think of the customer first. Our stakeholders are our customers. The pharmaceutical industry is our customer. The Pharmacists Council of Nigeria, we are partners. The pharmacists are our customers. So the notion of a bully is disappearing from NAFDAC, because without partnering with your stakeholders or making them to understand where you are coming from, it is difficult even for our own regulatory decisions to be effective. And we have been doing that. We've been meeting with PMG Man. We have been meeting with AFBTE, that's Association of Food Beverage Group. We have been meeting with MAN, Manufacturing Association of Nigeria. We've been meeting with ACPN, Community Pharmacists, because that is the only way to solve problems. Let me give an example of substandard falsified medicines. It is a bane on us as a country. But if we don't talk the facts and meet with the stakeholders, the people that are really concerned, you may not understand what is going on. 30% of our medicines are made in Nigeria. We had to now see from the local manufacturer's perspective that what is the problem, and we now understand better that local content is what we should be emphasizing. Does that mean we will not import? No, we will keep importing. It is the ratio. Then we listen to APIN, Association of Pharmaceutical Importers of Nigeria. We understood where they are coming from, but we underscore the point that we've got to emphasize local content. What did NAFDAC do? NAFDAC said, if you have been importing for 15 years on a cycle of 5 years renewal, start thinking of migrating to local manufacturing or partnership with other companies. So we give them 5 years of warning that if 20 companies are manufacturing Panadol and you are bringing Panadol from overseas, it's high time you started looking at partnering. But it is because we are dialoguing with them. Others, of course, people want their own interests to be protected. And I tell them that, look, NAFDAC is like a mother of so many children. You cannot sacrifice one child for the other. But in terms of local content, we've got to be proud in what we can do. We have to be proud in what we can do. And the government is stepping up. The government started this low interest loan for pharmaceutical companies. About 15 companies have gained from that. The government started through CBN, the Health Sector Research and Development Intervention Scheme, of which I'm the leader of the body of experts. We want to emphasize research and development. Without research and development, we cannot move further. Science doesn't jump at you. You immerse yourself, you swim in the pool of science, and you know where the crevices and whatnot are. So partnerships is extremely important. NAFDAC is customer focused, agency minded, country dedicated. If those three things come to bear, then we won't have any problem. Because whatever I want to do, I'm trying to do, I will be thinking of my stakeholder, which is now partnership. Thank you very much.
Very much. I'd like to swing to a perspective of private sector and bring Clare in and ask Clare to to reflect some on what the more critical partnerships are and how to create a win-win mindset rather than the kind of destructive win-lose approach of people kind of thinking that, you know, I need to play off the other person to make the most for myself. How do the players partner? You know, take at a very basic level. I mean, the doctor that doesn't have cooperation of the pharmacist is not going to be effective. The pharmacist that doesn't have the cooperation of some other member of the healthcare team is not getting anywhere. Yet, all we see around the place is reporting on how the professional groups are battling one another. So it's a zero-sum thing, and people are losing. Taking it from that reign of practice into pure implementation on a commercial basis, what are the most important partnerships, and how can we work those partnerships to advance the interest of everybody?
Thank you very much, Prof. To my mind, there are two levels of partnerships. One I've mentioned before, which is the public-private partnerships. So public here meaning, of course, the Ministry of Health, be it the Federal Ministry of Health or the State Ministry of Health. The second, of course, is the regulator and the private sector. The challenge really is on the private sector. As I mentioned in the first webinar we had, the private sector in Nigeria actually provides about 60% of the healthcare, but is very fragmented with lots of small players. Now, while that is going on, if we don't organize ourselves as a group to speak with one voice, we will not be able to engage the public sector properly. And this has been a challenge for most of the ministers. We have two former ministers on this call. They have various interest groups that are lobbying for their own silo. And while everybody is lobbying for their own, it's not always in the best interest of the Nigerian patient. So that is why federations like the Healthcare Federation of Nigeria, like the West African Healthcare Federation, and on the continent, the African Healthcare Federation was set up to be able to speak with one voice for the private sector, cross-cutting across the entire value chain of healthcare. Pharmacy and pharmacists are an integral part of the healthcare system. But sometimes if you think of only pharmacy and you go to the minister to lobby for certain policies, it is not the same when you go along with your entire members of the private sector to be able to do the same thing, and be not to talk about your individual hat, but what is in the best interest of Nigeria. So if I use the Healthcare Federation of Nigeria as example, that is an organization that speaks with one voice for the whole of private sector. We have pharmacists in industry, in community, we have doctors in general practice, we have those that finance healthcare, we have those that help with continuous professional development. And with that, you can be able to speak, the Minister of Health, the regulator is able to speak with one voice about cross-cutting issues, and it's very important. Now, in addition to that, of course, you still have the individual groups, and that's why the associations like the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Group is a very strong group in terms of manufacturing. You have APIN, you have other organizations. So I think it's professionals organizing themselves in the right silo, but also thinking of the bigger picture, which is private sector healthcare. If 60% of our healthcare is provided by the private sector, government must be able to constructively dialogue with us. Now, what are some of those things that I think can make a difference? Prince Adelusi-Adeluyi, you mentioned that I'm known for talking about disruption, but it's always innovative, positive, innovative disruption, Prince. So it is very important that we think of leveraging on innovation in today's world to be able to engage our public sector. And as many of the previous speakers have said, crisis has been a key accelerator to providing and putting healthcare on the map. I mean, prior to now, Prof. Utomi, it's fantastic that you are seeing healthcare as a very major, important economic driver. COVID, it has taken us COVID to come to this country and to come to the rest of the world to put healthcare on the map. If at the end of the day, only 5% of the national budget is spent on healthcare, that's one of our biggest issues, is that healthcare has not been seen as what wins you elections. We've had a lot of lip service to healthcare with no political will. And therefore, we've had, and we should leverage on the present crisis to be able to spur that innovative disruption and might make some changes. I'll mention just a few because of time. I think the first thing to my mind is the importance of providing incentives for local manufacturing. We need physical and non-physical incentives. We already have NEPSA that has special economic zones for industry. The same challenges that affect all industries in Nigeria also affect healthcare. So we need to have duty exemptions, tax breaks. We need to have special land with infrastructure already there so that though we can reduce the barrier to entry. We must have policies that push or invert the pyramid from 70% of imported drugs to 70% drugs made in Nigeria. It should be a deliberate medium to long-term policy and such that Nigeria, state and federal governments, buys made in Nigeria. We need to have a policy on backward integration where our finished products, all the excipients, all the active ingredients, raw materials, reagents, are majorly coming from Nigeria. And that can only be done if we have an R&D policy. For us in the industry, we need to push self-regulation. We don't need to just wait for our regulator to tell us what to do and when to do. We should self-regulate. If I see a pharmaceutical company or a pharmacy down the road doing the wrong thing, I should be in the same position to be able to call them to order. We need to increase their human resources for healthcare, especially pharmacists. We're not producing enough pharmacists, but more importantly, we're not even keeping our pharmacists. I mentioned the last time that we're losing 7 doctors a week and pharmacists a week prior to COVID. As we speak right now, there's a mass exodus of our young pharmacists, of our young doctors from the country. We are now in the hands of unqualified people handling procurement and distribution of drugs. So we need to nicely embrace them through task shifting. Get people who are not necessarily qualified at the moment, get them through courses, through the Academy of Pharmacists, through the Fellows of Pharmacists. We have a lot of vehicles where we can get more people to do structured training to get them involved. And finally, we have to stop silo thinking. It is important, and how you have been able to engage us, through the economy, thinking of healthcare as an economic contributor. We need to speak a different language. We need to embrace GDP, speak EBITDA, speak all the language that the economists like, and provide and get our voice known so that we have access to finance. 100 billion naira from the central bank is a great start. But as I mentioned before, it is a drop in the ocean. We need $1.5 billion, not 100 billion naira, to be able to change the infrastructural landscape of which pharmaceutical industries and the pharmaceutical value chain is an integral part of that. We have COVID vaccines that are arriving in our country in the next few weeks. Where is this going to be stored? Only one major warehouse is there, cold chain facility in Abuja. Why are we not leveraging the private sector capabilities for this drug distribution? Because we don't have a voice at the table. And I think this dialogue that we started today, which is already ongoing with the Academy of Pharmacists, should be we should agree today to make it either a monthly, quarterly. If it's too often, it may not be great, but at least a quarterly, as a start, quarterly dialogue with key action points taken from it. So we go from a talk shop to a workshop into actionable points, take the low-hanging fruits, but have a medium to long-term strategic plan that we all sign to. Come what may, government can come and go and can change, but this plan that we all collectively develop and agree must stay. And I think when you look at Singapore and other countries, what makes them so different is the fact that they're able to plan 25 years ahead. We plan, but every government comes and goes, political will is not there, we lose everything and we start again. And we have these piles and piles and piles of policies that don't get implemented because it's not our policy, it's the last government's policy. So really, let's agree a plan. Let's also make sure we have the political will.
Claire, that's so important because if you have a body of the critical stakeholders that has come to some consensus about what track to travel, I don't think that any government that comes will be strong enough to push their consensus aside. And that's why this working together is important. The governments are usually looking for how to go. And if there is no organized push, then they go in any which way they find. But when they are industry, all these major stakeholders are organized, they're working together, and things are running in the appropriate direction, it will be hard for a government to say, look, we don't want to go. I always give this example in the UK of Norman Lamont. Norman Lamont as Minister for Industry, very close to the then Prime Minister, I believe it was John Major, and CBI finished the meeting and said Norman Lamont must go. The next week, Norman Lamont was not in the cabinet. So I think that it's important for stakeholders to be able to recognize that they have enough, let's call it weight, to ensure that these Congo policies do not continue like this, because it is hurting the sector, it's hurting everybody. But I want to, stay with the point that you tried to make. You are following the DG of NAFDAC on the track of patriotism. Now, don't get me wrong. I am the biggest advocate for passionate patriotism. But in a sense, that is a moral suasion thing. The whole concept of self-interest in development, economic development, where the unseen hand invariably regulates, shows that maximizing self-interest invariably comes to terms with the fact that the best self-interest is advanced within the advance of the common good of all. And you see this, if I give the example in Nigeria here, back in the 80s, with manufacturers favoring foreign exchange policy in one direction and importers in another direction. Eventually, everybody came to an understanding that if the person you support pushes it in that direction, these people lose, and some other person comes in, those other people lose. It's best for us to have a level playing field. And so we had markets, and everything settled in everybody's best interest. Why should we not be able to feel comfortable that people can come and push their self-interest within regulated conversation, and invariably everything leads to the emergence of institutions that advance the common good of all? I think this is part of the challenge that real dialogue will enable us build, because people will eventually find that it's in their best interest for the common good to be advanced, not because they are nice people or bad people, but that's the only really reasonable thing to do. I think on that note, I'd like to be able to get some comments and questions from many who are joining us. I'm not sure all of those who are on the call, but anybody who would like to raise an issue can indicate. I know that there is a particular interest from a lady in the UK, Dr. Okereke. I don't know if she's on the call, but yes. Just raise your hand in the, not physically like this. If you do, I'm sure you'll be seen, but raise your hands electronically, and we'll invite you to raise the question. Okay. Right, I think we're trying to pull up a raised hand. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
Prof, can you hear me, please?
Okay, yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Thank you to all the people who have spoken. I like hearing the passionate part and everything. My my question, and sorry, my name is Tunde Odulami, I'm from GS1 Nigeria. Now, my question is this. On the issue of the distribution in itself and the role that technology will play, because distribution, yes, we've spoken about the commercial part, we've spoken about the government part, but we have distribution now, a whole supply chain system that is no longer fragmented in the modern world. They are now connected together. Nigeria needs to embrace a distribution system that links all the participants within the supply chain together using digital platforms. Now, the health minister and the DG of NAFDAC has been looking at some of these things. We need to hear from the private sector. What is their take on digitalizing distribution in Nigeria, using things like blockchain, standards, global standard for distribution, bringing all the parties together, submitting information for track and trace, and moving the country forward. And I must also thank Clare for what she said about putting the patient at the center of the discussion. So in all policy formulation, where does the Nigerian patient fit in? These are my questions. Thank you.
I think it's a very important question. Incidentally, Nnamdi Obi was supposed to address that question, but could not connect from where he is out of the country this afternoon. But I think that there are several of the people on the panel who can respond to that. If we take 2 or 3 other questions, then we'll come back to the panel for a response to that question, which is really very, very important.
Prof, good evening. Can I come in?
Okay, please.
Okay. Thank you, sir. My name is Manchu Agbadon, and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself listening to the very well-informed speakers. I'm not in the industry, but I'm the stakeholder because I'm a consumer of pharmaceutical products. Now, I want to speak briefly on the issue of implementation. I think there are 3 things that are key that need to be underscored on the issue of implementation. The first is the political leadership. We need the buy-in of the political leadership. A political leadership that is conscious of the fact that a healthy nation is a wealthy nation. With the coming on board now of COVID, I think the chickens have come home to roost. We are now all running from pillar to post because we are not prepared. Successive governments have never prepared, or we're never prepared for a day like this or a time like this. I think that is key. We need a political leadership that needs to know that the health of the people, of his people, is important, most important than any other thing, and that should be prioritized in his policy implementation program. That is key. The other one, and of course, closely allied to this is the issue of funding. If we have a government that is alive to its responsibility health-wise, we need to look at what is the budgetary provision in its annual rituals for the health sector. For instance, this year, I did a quick check. I found that we have 632.7 billion budgeted for the health sector. That is just a figure that is not near what is expected, looking at the rot, looking at the decay in the industry. So that again requires political commitment for government to say, well, we need to put a lot of money in the health sector. And out of that, they put 45 billion for Gavi, which is going to be the primary window to addressing the issue of COVID. We won't begin to wonder, what has 45 billion got to do for 200 million people or 200 million plus people? That again shows that we don't have the political leadership that is committed to the health sector. The last point I want to underscore is the issue of the attitudinal change of Nigerians, which was made by the NAFDAC DG earlier. We all need to know that we have no other country but this. We must stop cutting corners, particularly those who are in the industry. for instance, the local producer, what is the quality assurance of their products? Yes, we want to encourage Nigerians to take the place of importation of these products. But how are we ensure that what we get value for money? Because it's not, when you take medication, you expect to get results. Are we getting results for the drugs that are manufactured by Nigerian operator? How are we be able to regulate to ensure that we meet quality, so that we can meet the needs of Nigeria? This is key. How are we able to empower Nigerians? Of course, the issue of putting the right people in the right places, the issue of nepotism is also undermining the health sector. Are we putting the right people as regulators? Are we putting the right people in the right places? Are the regulators allowed to do their job as it should be done? These are key. Unless we ensure all of this, I'm sure we'll have a long way to go. I think I should stop at that, Prof. Thank you.
In fact, one of the issues coming from those questions from Mr. Igbadon relates to the fact that healthcare is not on the agenda of Nigeria's political parties, which is very bizarre, very strange. Because if you take the US, for example, it will be one of the top issues on the agenda of any political party going into elections. But this is partly so because the healthcare industry has not done enough to force it on the agenda of the politician. So without being partisan, it is normal for the industry to push for anybody who is running for any office to be able to have a position on healthcare. That way, awareness will grow and people will realize, Clare was making the point that I tried to raise, that healthcare is one of the most important development issues. The CVL has had an annual lecture that's been running for years, usually international speakers from around the world. And the focus is on one thing or the other contributing to development in Africa. Last year, it was trade, and the president of the Afro-Exim Bank gave that lecture. The year before, it was 2 years ago, it was Paul Collier from Oxford speaking on ocean-facing cities, and so on and so forth. That of this year, which is only in 3 weeks' time, on the 5th of February, is asking the question, which of these factors is the most important for development? Is it healthcare and education? Is it capital? Is it trade? Is it the strength of institutions? All these are very important factors. How do we force politicians, therefore, to realize that one of the most important areas that drives development, you can actually look at investment in healthcare to the GDP of a country. There's a direct relationship. Until we get, experts help both the industry and politicians to articulate these things, we will not be able to change the kinds of ratios that Matthew Igbadon spoke to. We'll take the next question.
I believe that might be me. Can I go ahead? Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Professor, for telling me about this very important discussion and giving me the opportunity to participate. I'm Ebere Okereke. I'm a global health strategist. I work for the UK, but my primary area of work is global health security with African and Asian countries. I work with the Nigeria Center for Disease Control and the Africa Center for Disease Control. And what we focus on is building capacity for global health security. And I have to welcome all the comments and really help. It's really interesting to hear all the very important comments that have been made during this session. And I do not find anything I could possibly disagree with. I wanted to focus on a couple of things to mention from my perspective. And I'm picking up from what Clare said about working together. We do some work around developing leaders in health. And one area that we're particularly passionate and focused on working with Africa Center for Disease Control at the moment is actually improving the quality of our health leaders. And that's actually getting them to think beyond their technical health expertise so that they can actually engage and partner more effectively, because like all of you have said, health is a global responsibility for everybody. We don't have to be health professionals to be concerned and able to influence health. If anything, what Professor Tedros, the current DG of WHO, actually emphasizes that you're more likely to achieve health improvement if you work in the finance sector than if you work in the health sector. And bearing that in mind, we're really keen to ensure that leaders in health, of current and future, understand the importance of engagement across the system, working with the supply, the delivery, the manufacturers, the investors, to understand the responsibility and to start to actually change the mindset. We tend to see health as a drain on resources, because when you get ill, it costs you a lot of money, particularly in our sector where a lot of health expenditure is out of pocket. But we also need to start to look at health, like you just mentioned, Professor, as an investment in the economic system. If you have a healthy workforce, you're more likely to actually yield the benefit of the sort of the demographic dividend that we have across the African continent, with such a large number of young people who could potentially expand our economy. So we're looking at how do we change the future leaders so they actually think more collegiately, do more of the stakeholder engagement and partnership at the beginning, not what we currently see and what was described earlier as policies created and presented as a done deal. So actually you create more robust policy if you engage the sectors that are likely to be involved in funding, implementation, and evaluation of that funding. One thing I wanted to mention, which is slightly on the side, but I think is really important, is actually a very simple thing and links to the question the earlier speaker asked about information. We actually do not know what our health workforce and our health market is. We do not know, because we don't have civil registration systems to know who goes to hospital, to health center, who goes for preventative care, who goes for surgical interventions. We don't collect that data. Now, the private sector, in working as they currently do, which is predominantly rather fragmented, like Claire mentioned, do have that data. Now, if we're able to actually start to get them to cooperate and to start to standardize some of that information, we will start to understand the size of the domestic health market. And then there is an attraction for people to invest in it. So there is the issue about actually recognizing that health is not just the responsibility of health professionals, but there's also about recognizing the size of the opportunity in terms of economic benefit that can be made if you actually understand the size of that market. So I wanted to just mention those two issues, and to take this opportunity to ask people to go to the Africa CDC website and look at the Kofi Annan Leadership Fellowship, which is very much focused around building stronger leaders in health across the continent. And we welcome any suggestions and any comments into developing that program. So thank you very much, Professor, for giving me this opportunity. I'm really enjoying listening to all the interesting dialogue going on. Thank you.
Very much. It's great to have you. I think we can take one more, because we have to then begin to round up, and then we will take a round of the panelists to make comments. Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for this very interesting topic. My contribution, one, is to look at the drug security angle of all of this. The DG NAFDAC talked about Nigeria having the capacity for about 30% currently, and it's our wish that we can push it to about 70% local production. Then I want to know what are the measures being put in place specifically by the regulator to ensure that we have more players coming into manufacturing, making it actually look lucrative enough, because any businessman that wants to go into whatever will be looking at the return on investment. And the way it is currently, a lot of people have been discouraged to actually start anything manufacturing in this our land for now. So, and I'm aware that even the India that we all go to most of the time, the government specifically have in place measures to encourage more players to come in. You can start from a small place, and from there you grow. You know, currently I know that to venture into production, it is not a child play in this country. So it's a play if NAFDAC can begin to look at how to encourage more players to come on board. And secondly, I actually run a community practice in Lagos. I was one time the state chairman of ACPN and the PSN in the States. And during the COVID crisis, which we are still undergoing, there are so many challenges. Again, it boils down to this drug security, whereby during the lockdown period, when countries closed their borders, it was so difficult for most of the distributors to get supply from Asia and from wherever they normally bring these products into the country. And this, of course, leads to empty shelves in the pharmacies. And then for those who are able to actually obtain few commodity at very expensive prices, they also have to do their markup. And in the process, most of the end product gets very expensive to the client, to the end users. And we found out there are cases where the Consumer Protection Agency of the country begin to go to pharmacies to harass colleagues and demand that they should bring down their prices. You didn't purchase the product for these people, so you cannot in any way ask them to bring it down. They showed evidence of invoices showing how exorbitant these products were obtained. Again, it boils down to the fact that we don't produce nothing. These were hand sanitizers then. Hand sanitizers.
Clearly not the role of that agency.
Yeah, it's
you know, we used to have a PPIB, Prices, Productivities and Incomes Board. It proved to be a disaster for the economy. I can tell you some of the things that happened from those seizings and why they were eventually abandoned as structural adjustment came on. One of my favorite jokes is when I went to work for a company called Volkswagen. Because of PPIB regulations, you could not sell a car for more than so much. But those who were in the business knew that if they sold a car for that much, they were giving away the prize, you know, with some gifts in every trunk of the car. So people cleverly came up with, okay, you can have a prize for a brand new car, but there's no prize for a used car. So the policy was to generate as many used cars as possible and auction the used cars on Saturday mornings. And people bid twice the price of a brand new car to buy a used car. When you have those kinds of situations, we make a mockery of economics. That's certainly not their issue. But I'll take the last question. We can't take more than one more. And we will get all
done,
the
Prof. Can I have a last
to
submission,
give
sir?
1 minute.
Possible? Hello?
Right.
Okay, I am asking, is there a possibility of having in place a health bank? Just something similar
to
the
bank.
Health bank, specifically for the health sector. Something similar to the Bank of Industry, the Bank of Agriculture, where we will be guaranteed a single digit, credit facility. Because the way it is now,
everything is possible in this world, but it's got to be viable. And entrepreneurs can create that. It doesn't have to be created by government. And one of the things I say is that there's so much private capital in the world. If people see that it makes sense, although this is the rule of government, the superstructure needs to be something that works, that people can see to work. Not that the next governor comes and demolishes the policy and so on and so forth. If we created the right environment, the right legal framework, private capital will come in and set up such banks. Okay, the last question.
Could that be me, sir?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Professor.
Unmute if you are not, please.
Thank you, sir. My name is Professor N.N. Wanang. I'm the Secretary General of West African Postgraduate College of Pharmacists, and I'm also a lecturer with the University of Jos. And presently, I'm the chairman of the Plateau State Research Committee on COVID-19 and other infectious diseases. I want to appreciate the speakers before me. They've made very substantial points on this interesting debate. But permit me to just trace a little on the controversy on Nigerian health vis-a-vis the vaccine vaccine production. We have a lot of policies on ground, but like my seniors have said, we have a problem with implementation. Be that as it may, let's have a look at the structure of Nigeria and the vaccines. It will interest you to know that as far back as 1925, the Nigerian federal government had a vaccine production center in Lagos. It will interest you to also know that as far back as in the 30s, smallpox vaccines were produced here in Nigeria. It will interest you to know that around 1945, Nigeria was producing tons of anti-rabies vaccine. Up to the 50s, we were producing yellow fever vaccine. Suddenly, sometimes around 1991, the Yaba Production Center or the Oshodi's Production Center in Lagos was closed for upgrading. Until date, nothing has happened about those areas. Currently, I think the National Veterinary Research Institute of Pharm is the only center that is a vaccine production unit. I wonder why the federal government cannot channel their energy into working on those moribund projects so that we can have something working. I could remember when the COVID issue came up, Nigeria was quick to go into China to go and bring in doctors that suddenly we don't know their fate, we don't know their contribution to Nigeria. We don't even know where they are today. Then we equally have a rush again for the vaccine. Perfect. It is good that we have these vaccines. It is good that we have a protective index to our people. But the question is, we have scientists in this country, local scientists that have done a lot of substantial developments in this COVID fight. For instance, herbal medications have been produced, have been formulated here in this country. The team to which I lead had made some productions, but we're having a lot of challenges on government support, on regulatory support, on authorization support. And if it is so, what is the fate of the Nigerian scientists? How do we come back to encourage the Nigerian scientists? We kept on talking about being a consumer nation. We have always been importing. If you go to the US, if you go to the UK, the bulk of the scientists you'll meet in their laboratories are blacks, and incidentally, most likely Nigerians. We have a lot of such brains here. Why can't we deliberately develop instances whereby we can promote our local scientists, we can work on our indigenous problems or properties here and see how we can expose it instead of, export rather, instead of us waiting for other countries to give us a lead or give us a direction in what we are doing. Thank you, sir.
Important question. I would like to take a response from the panelists, and I'll make a remark turning to an Indian economist on this subject. Let us start with Prince Juli Adelusi-Adeluyi. 1 minute response and closing remarks.
Thank you, Pat. I would leave the younger generation to be more granular about their responses to those questions. I'd just like to make some closing remarks. You were kind enough to make me make the opening remarks, and I had mentioned 5 areas where I think the discussion should go through. All the 5 areas have been mentioned, except one area which I want to just briefly mention, and that is the need for this sector to increase and improve upon its clout. Unless you have clout, you tend to be taken for granted. And whatever you say or do can be passed off without any consequences. Simple example, in the 70s, a young man called Professor Bayomi Shofora and his team at the Obafemi Awolowo University came up with a fantastic result of their research on Fagara xanthocylloides. They isolated the metabolites, the alkaloids and the amyls and so on, and pronounced on sickle cell. Nothing has been done since then. If it was an organization with a clout, a sector with a clout, there should have been some follow-up, which is what the young man was saying about abandonment of earlier efforts. I would say that we need to improve on our clout, which is the last point I made and which has not been touched upon. We need to improve on our network. If we improve on our network with the necessary stakeholders, then our net worth will improve. I just give one illustration. I happen to be Minister of Health, and I found that in the ministry, the NAFDAC Act was so well watered down that were it to be applied, it would have been a toothless bulldog. And I was able to be in a position to change it and make it more concentrated. Today, we're listening to NAFDAC talking with power. I'm just appealing that such power should be made as elastic as possible so that the impact and the influence grows. The same thing with the Pharmaceutical Council of Nigeria. It had disappeared in the ministry, and I had to set it up again. Also with the NIPRD, the Institute for Research. Now, why am I saying that? I'm saying is that unless you have somebody in the kitchen, you should not, or you cannot complain about the nature of the food. So members of this particular sector should try to seek positions of influence. In the National Assembly, for example, it's going to be difficult to do things against lawyers because lawyers decided a long time ago that they will be very present in that particular sector of our national arrangement. So I would say I want to thank you, Pat, for bringing us together. You will hear from us, as I said. I'm going to have to be in contact now, offline, with my very good friend and brother, Professor Chukwu, because there's a great deal that has come out of this meeting. And we would make sure that we make such progress in the area of teamwork and data gathering that you will say to yourself in a few years' time, it was good you started it. I really appreciate your inviting me.
I wonder if Professor Chukwu is still there. If Prof. Chukwu is not there, because I know he was in an awkward place, let's go to the DG NAFDAC response to those questions and closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Prof. It has been an interesting afternoon, very informative. Quality of local manufactured pharmaceuticals was mentioned, and I've already referred to the fact that if NAFDAC is not strong, the local manufacturer cannot be strong. We have about 165 pharmaceutical companies in Nigeria. I'm talking of active pharmaceutical companies. And we have strengthened, or we are strengthening, the good manufacturing compliances for all the 165 companies, because NAFDAC is being strengthened internally. Internal capacity of NAFDAC is being strengthened. Why is this so important? Because you and I take medicines, and I want to have confidence in the medicine that I buy from the pharmacy. So we are improving steadily the quality of manufactured products, pharmaceutical manufactured products in Nigeria. Our companies are also partnering with multinationals. And why is that so? Because we categorize our pharmaceutical companies based on the level of compliance. It is not punitive. It is a way of saying, okay, you need to do A, B, C, D, E in order to move up on the ladder, so to say. So we can now see multinationals partnering with few of our manufacturers. So a lot of things are going on in terms of quality of locally made products. In terms of distribution, a remark was made about track and trace. NAFDAC is heading track and trace, meaning you track your medicine from the manufacturer to the consumer. And it is technology driven. And the mandate of NAFDAC is to control distribution. However, the focus wasn't that sharp, but it's becoming sharper and sharper. We are supposed to be controlling the distribution. That doesn't mean we are in charge of the distribution, but we have to control it. And what track and trace will do is to ensure that at each point in the supply chain, NAFDAC knows what is going on. But this is multi-stakeholder initiative. It cannot be just NAFDAC. So that is part of what we are doing. And we are going to use track and trace for piloting the COVID vaccine distribution. We are working with primary health. We are working with NCDC on this. So a lot is going on in terms of making our distribution supply chain more logical. And then there was another mention that another thing that was mentioned about vaccines. Professor Wanang, I really thank you for mentioning this, because vaccines were being produced for decades and decades in Nigeria. What happened to us? We lost it. We lost our focus. But now there are new regulations for making vaccines without NAFDAC having maturity level 3, meaning that we are putting in place everything that we're supposed to put in place up to maturity level 3. Nigeria can never manufacture vaccines. So we are working feverishly as we speak to ensure that all the about over 280 indicators that we are supposed to, requirements that we are supposed to meet, that we are meeting them. We are going up and up and up in terms of satisfying those requirements. So things have changed. If NAFDAC is not maturity level 3, we cannot even manufacture vaccines. So that is how tied we are all in this together. But I just want to say thank you for everything that has been said today. In terms of herbal medicine, it is a low-hanging fruit. It is a low-hanging fruit that we are supposed to have tapped into. And that was why NAFDAC started the Herbal Medicine Product Committee last year, before COVID, 2019, sorry, before COVID, in order to ensure that our locally made herbal medicines get the type of attention that they're supposed to get. NAFDAC has changed, the perspective in terms of listing, meaning we are now more proactive with our stakeholders in order to make sure that it's not just listing, but we also translate it into clinical evaluation so that it is not just using it in Nigeria, it's also exporting it, increasing our GDP. So with this, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for listening. Professor Utomi, let's keep this up. Thank you so much.
Sure. Appreciate those responses. Let me invite Clare Mashe to respond to some of the questions that she may have views on.
Thank you, Prof. I think the DG has actually answered most of the questions, so I'll just go on straight to my final words. And that really is that the time is now. And there couldn't have been a better time than now. We should leverage on the crisis as a key accelerator to do what we require. We need the political will. We need to put healthcare on the agenda as a key priority area. The discussion had started prior to this and is going to continue. I think this meeting that you have had has been a precursor to extended dialogue, and we agree that structured dialogue is the way to go. On the table here, we have key players in the industry. We have our regulator, we have former, ministers of health, but we have a few people who are missing. We do need the ministries of health, the Federal Ministry of Health and the State Ministry of Health on the table. We also need to have members of the National Assembly, because some of what is required for sustainability is not just policy, but also law. For example, we need a law that makes healthcare insurance mandatory. That could bring colossal change, where people don't have to pay out of pocket, where you have access to quality medicines and eventually universal healthcare coverage, which pharmacy and providing quality medicines will be a part of that. So it's very important that we do that. We have agreed that as private sector, an enabling environment is what we require from government to unlock the potentials. And to be able to have that, we must have healthcare as a key priority. We must have incentives, both physical and non-physical incentives, as it has been provided to other sectors, as we can see the change with agriculture, with telco, and so on and so forth. We need to have new laws on out-of-pocket payments and mandatory insurance. We need to have local content where people buy Nigeria. Now, if we have a law that makes that, we will galvanize and learn from what the oil industry has done and how you have local companies who are doing exceptionally well, who have been able to bring in technology, and they have forced people to do technology transfer. We need to be able to get to that level. Yes, we need our multinationals, but at some stage we also need some technology transfer so we can do both backward integration and forward integration and take the Nigerian healthcare industry, especially the pharmaceutical industry, where it should be. I agree with all the last speakers on the importance of leveraging on technology. So track and trace, blockchain, artificial intelligence, all of this is very important. But let's even go to the basics. Can we have a system where we identify the key data that is required so that we stop just rule of thumb, 70%, 60%, and so on, hurling out figures? Can we work with what we know? And there's enough information within the ministries and the private sector. If we gather the information and have a right way of reporting it, we can do the analytics, and that analytics will make and buttress all the decisions we're making so that it's evidence-based, as against just what I think or what the DG thinks or what Prince Julius Adelusi thinks. But the long and short of everything that we've discussed today is that when there's a will, there's a way. And when there's political will, and we put healthcare top of the agenda, we have the open dialogue, and we get the other people in the party, the NIPC, the Nigerian Investment Promotion Council, NEPSA, Nigerian Expo, all of the various agencies, we get them on the table, have this constant dialogue, we will start to move our pharmaceutical industry and access to quality health forward. Thank you.
Pharmacy, Ahmed there, still there? PRCN, last word.
Yes, I'm still here. Hello.
Okay, lovely.
I'm here.
Yeah, you make closing remarks.
Thank you very much. A lot has been said as regards issues of partnership, but I want to bring something to the fore. I want all of us to look at. Many a times we wait for crisis situations before we consider it to bring every relevant stakeholder to the table, particularly institutions of government. I want to give an instance. When we had crisis of drug abuse, it was a good time to bring together NDLEA, NAFDAC, PCN, and everybody, stakeholders that matter. When now that we have crisis, pandemic crisis, we're thinking of bringing everybody together. What I'm trying to say here is that away from the stakeholders that we are directly responsible to in terms of regulation, the need for synergy among institutions of government without necessarily waiting for only crisis situation is very critical. And one thing that is very important is the fact that each of these institutions look at itself or themselves as having mandates to do what they are doing. But very importantly is that for us to be able to achieve the bigger picture, the bigger goal, we need to work together. But who drives that process is a question that I want to leave for this platform, such that every component of government that need to work together, even if we don't have any crisis situation at hand, let us sit down, review with our stakeholders, things that we need to do to move the system and the country forward. Thank you, sir.
So very much. Let me say that the conversation moves us one more step down the line. A very important point has been raised in Pharmacist Ahmed's last point about how government agencies collaborate to facilitate things. And we've talked about the relationship of stakeholders and all of that. I'd said during the course of the conversation that I wanted to make a point from a certain Indian economist. Raghuram Rajan was a professor at the University of Chicago, Graduate School of Business, became chief economist of the IMF, and then governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Along with one of his colleagues, wrote a book years ago that was titled Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. It was really a tour de force on how institutions facilitate entrepreneurship. And one of the challenges that we find is that in countries like Nigeria, enterprise does not grow as it should grow because those institutions are weak. Raghuram Rajan and Luigi Zingales make this very important point in that, from evidence, that book, that an economy like the US easily reinvents itself because opportunities for venturing are created by the institutional arrangements. Often it involves government support, but more importantly, it involves legislation or, in fact, judicial activism that creates an enabling environment for capital to support ideas, to create new vistas. In fact, they particularly celebrated in that book former US Supreme Court Justice Charles Brandeis and the role that his judgments played in making America one of those countries in which entrepreneurship is so easy. I mean, in Nigeria, you venture and something goes wrong, your back is broken and you are broken forever. In America, you can fall and get up again and fall and get up again. And the institutions make it possible where you have the heart to keep going. So there's a lot of work that we need to do as interested parties to create those institutional arrangements. It doesn't have to take central bank to put up $5 billion like Clare suggested that is needed. It could be that key players in the industry force the system to have the appropriate behavior that creates an enabling environment where the industry players themselves can approach available foreign capital to just come into the economy and support that particular industry. So there's a lot of work to be done by all of us. And in thanking all the panelists who have spoken so very well, and the many who have participated from just like across around the world, the possibilities are infinite. There's lots and lots of uncertainty. But you see what? If you cannot find the future, if you cannot understand where the future is going, you can create that future. Why don't we create a future for the pharmaceutical sector in Nigeria? And tomorrow, we may be just glad that we did. Thank you all. God bless.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam DG. Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you.
Please stay safe.